All right, what's up, everybody? I'm coming at you. I'm not going to do all the music and stuff. This is going to be a shorter live stream, but welcome to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles, where we prefer truth over narrative and principles over politics and principles over personalities, as the case may be. That's one of the things that we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to let a few more people come in here. Hope everybody's doing hunky-dory. Hope everybody's doing OBKB. I'll give props to anybody who understands that reference. Just going to bring some other stuff up here. How's everybody doing? It's Thursday. It's almost Friday. So y'all should be happy about that. I know I am, although it doesn't matter to me because I work on the weekends anyway. But you guys get what I'm talking about here. All right. Almost ready. Okay. Now, before I get started, I also want to remind you guys that LibertyNation.com is a proud sponsor of A Fresh Perspective. Check out LibertyNation.com for all of your conservatarian news, original articles and analysis, videos, podcasts, Liberty Nation Radio, and their signature TV program, The Conservative 5, all on LibertyNation.com, conservative news where truth matters. All right. We're going to talk about the California recall election and all the stuff that's coming along with it. What's up, Rachel D? Nice to see you. Just enjoying Nikki get red pilled. I don't know if she's getting red pilled, but this whole thing is very entertaining to watch. As a matter of fact, I'm loving it. It's funny. I was telling my colleagues yesterday, I never thought in a million years that I'd be writing so much about Nicki Minaj ever. But that whole exchange is awesome. I'll probably talk about that on Friday. See how that goes. I guess she's supposed to be going to the White House, and then she's not going to be going to the White House. And then I don't know what's going on with that. Is she going to the White House? Who knows? But you guys aren't here to hear about Nicki Minaj. You're here to hear about the California recall election and Larry Elder and all that good stuff. So before I get started, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you what I'm not saying. While I do think that he is the main reason why the recall effort tanked, I'm not saying the loss is all Larry Elder's fault, right? If we're being honest, there are likely plenty of other factors that played into this whole thing. I mean, the fact is that California is a very blue state. Democrats outnumber Republicans by about 2-1. So these types of initiatives are very hard to succeed. The last time I did it was with, Governor Gray Davis, and his approval ratings were far lower than Newsom's are right now. And Newsom's ratings are low. So there was also that. And there were also other factors as well. But there were people who were working very hard on this recall election, and they deserve all kinds of props because this was a grassroots effort. And a lot of people put a lot of effort into this. Shout out to Jennifer Van Laar at Red State, Jennifer O'Connell, Kira Davis, and all the other people that were involved on the ground trying to make this thing happen. They did excellent work. But we saw how it went. Gavin Newsom is going to keep his job. And even though the polls were kind of showing that the recall effort might succeeded, over the past couple of weeks, the percentage gap between the yes and no votes widened, and it widened in favor of those who wish to keep Newsom in office. Now, so what happened here? First, I'm going to address the whole voter fraud thing. Voter fraud did not influence this election. I'm sorry, there is no evidence of that. I'm not saying that there wasn't funny business. I saw some headlines about at one county, 70% of voters were told that they had already voted. I don't know all the details of that yet, but obviously that's not going to influence this election. Here's the thing. The official results so far, they show that 63.9% of voters who wanted to keep Newsom in office, they made up 63.9% of the voters. Only 36.1% voted in favor of the recall. That's way too big of a gap. That's like 27.1% or something like that. So, or 27.8%, something like that. I can't remember. But that's way too wide of a gap to attribute this to voter fraud. So the fact of the matter is Californians voted the way that they voted. Now those numbers might change as they get more ballots in, whatever, but it's not gonna close the gap that much. So it doesn't really make sense to argue that this election was rigged, which, by the way, it probably would have turned out the same way anyway, but the fact that people were already saying it was rigged, I think I saw it up to even 1.5 to 2 weeks before September 14th that people were saying, oh, it's rigged. It's rigged. So these people were already setting up the excuse they were going to use in the event that the recall effort failed. It's not helpful. Even President Trump came out and said the California election is rigged. And like I said on my last live stream on Tuesday, that was the dumbest thing that we could have done. Like, we're talking about voter suppression, and we're suppressing our own votes by convincing Republicans that it's not worth it to show up at the polls. It's goofy. Now, I'm not saying that, again, if we hadn't been stupid in that regard, that the recall would have turned out differently, but it's still dumb. But like I said, I don't think that there is any greater contributor to the loss than the fact that the Republicans had the wrong front runner. Now, I'm also going to say that I don't think that his supposed domestic violence issues had anything to do with it. I think it was pretty clear to anybody watching that, his former fiance stepping forward when she did was very convenient timing. I don't really buy her story. I get that she may have been afraid and thought that maybe when he was looking at his gun that he was going to shoot her or whatever. That doesn't mean he was going to. There's no evidence that Elder was being violent. There was nobody to corroborate her story. I did defend Larry Elder on this, and I still do. Now, if more evidence comes out saying something different, then maybe I'll change my stance. But honestly, I don't think that Larry Elder is an abuser, at least not in the way that she was saying. But even so, I don't think that really had much of an impact, because like I said, it was pretty flimsy to begin with. Here's the thing. Elder entered the race 2 months before the September 14th deadline. So he basically entered the race 2 months before it was supposed to happen, whereas the other candidates were in much earlier. So already it kind of came off like this was more of a publicity ploy. This was an attempt to gain clout. And as time went on, polling showed that he was becoming the front runner among Republicans because he has name recognition with Republicans and only Republicans. And this is something that Kira brought up on the Red and Black show a while ago. Nobody knows who Larry Elder is outside of conservative circles. He's not that famous outside of that. I'm not saying nobody outside of that knows who he is. There's liberals who don't like him, obviously, that know who he is. But he's not as well known. And I think sometimes as Republicans, we kind of fall into the trap of thinking that if he's famous with us, then he's famous with other people. Or that if we like somebody, that means that everybody else likes them. So a lot of us sometimes can't fathom the idea that people might actually hate Larry Elder or even President Trump for that regard. That people think that because he's popular on the right, he's popular with the rest of the nation. That is simply not true. And I think that was one of the issues here, because we were looking more towards the celebrity and his name recognition and his notoriety, and not really considering, well, is he electable? Can he appeal to the rest of California? Can he at least be non-threatening enough that he wouldn't energize people who don't like him? And I'll talk about that in a second, because I think that's exactly what happened here. What happened is that he became the Democrats' perfect foil. And Democrats are great at messaging. And before Larry Elder started gaining traction, they were kind of floundering a bit, because at that point, the recall campaign was about Newsom and how horrible he was. And that was it. And the recall effort stayed on that message. But when Larry Elder started to get more traction, then we saw the Democrats were like, aha, here's what we can do. We can portray him as Trump Jr. or the Black Trump or whatever, the black face of white supremacy, and make him look so bad that Newsom, even if people don't like him, they'd rather have the devil that they know. And they used issues of race to galvanize their base to turn out and vote against him. Up until that point, it didn't seem like enthusiasm was really on Newsom's side. Because like I said, even if they may be Democrats, that doesn't mean that they like Newsom and that they would care if he lost his job, especially if there's going to be another election in just another year. And the fact of the matter is that, as you know, Larry Elder has made a series of questionable and offensive, controversial, and stupid comments, especially as it pertains to the Black community. This made it easy for Democrats to cast him as a disaster for the state. Now, I'm not saying he would have been. I'm just saying he gave them the ammo they needed to portray him as a disaster. And now the argument against that is like, well, they would have done that with anybody. If Kevin Kiley or Kevin Falconer would have been had been the front runner, they would have been bigots and Nazis and racists and people who kick puppies also. That's true, but where would the ammo be? Unless these people had something in their past, they wouldn't have the ammo. See, the thing is, they have to, if they're going to claim that somebody's a racist, they still have to put forth proof, because otherwise the only people that they will convince are people who already agree with them anyway, because they want to. So here's an example. In 2017, he had a tweet that he has since deleted, where he implied that women marching to protest President Trump's inauguration weren't attractive enough to have to worry about being sexually assaulted. Yeah, it's an off-color joke. I'm sure people will laugh at that, but again, that's ammo that can be used. He's made other controversial comments about women. In a 2000 column, he wrote, quote, "Women know less than men about political issues, economics, and current events. Good news for Democrats, bad news for Republicans. For the less one knows, the easier the manipulation." And that last sentence is right. If people know less, then it's easier to manipulate them. And he did cite a study conducted by Kathleen Hall Jamieson for the University of Pennsylvania. But this study also found that women tend to factor in other information, and they make decisions at the ballot box that are consistent with their self-interest. So his contention, it's debatable, but it's still offensive, right? I mean, when you put things a certain way, it can be used against you. He also argued that quote, women exaggerate the problem of sexism and domestic violence. Now, that's not something, especially domestic violence, downplaying domestic violence, unless you have a lot of compelling proof, not a good look, not a very good look, especially considering the fact that a lot of people might know a woman who experienced domestic violence or rape or sexism, things like that. A lot of us do know women or are friends with women or are related to women who have dealt with these types of things. So downplaying that just to cater to your audience, it's not a good look. It's not a good look. I'm sorry I'm drinking so much water. My throat is really dry. But one of the biggest things that blew up was what he said about reparations and slave owners in an interview with Candace Owens. And you might already know about this, but if you don't, I'm going to play it for you right now. 1 second. You're going to love this. It was beautiful. Oh, man. Why do we do this to ourselves? Okay. Here it comes. Check it out. Let me know if you're not able to hear it. Actually, let me go ahead and mute myself.
Right behind them.
By the way, when you mentioned that the UK was ahead of us, they were. Do you know that the slave owners were compensated? After they lost their quote unquote property, the government compensated slave owners.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so when people talk about reparations, do they really want to have that conversation? Because like it or not, slavery was legal. And so their property, their legal property, was taken away from them after the Civil War. So you can make an argument that the people that are owed reparations, and not only just Black people, but also the people whose quote property, close quote, was taken away after the end of the Civil War.
It doesn't get less funny. I've watched that like 3 or 4 times, and it doesn't get any less stupid. I mean. And here's the thing. He has said a lot of stuff throughout the years. I don't even know all of it. But here's the thing, and I'm going to be fair. I'm going to be fair here. And some people might not like this. Larry Elder was not supporting the idea that the descendants of slave owners should get reparations. He was not arguing for that. He wasn't saying that should happen. What he was saying was that the argument could be made against the people. When the conversation on reparations for descendants of slaves come up, he was saying that argument could be made to counter it. Now, that being said, it was still an incredibly dumb thing to say. Because even if somebody actually brought that argument up, is anybody going to take that seriously? I mean, first off, who's going to be stupid enough to put forth that argument knowing that nobody's going to take it seriously? Nobody's going to say, yeah, we should, recompense the slave owners. By the way, that actually did happen. A lot of slave owners were reimbursed by the government for taking their, quote, property away. So, yeah, nobody's going to make that argument. It was a goofy thing to say. But again, this is part and parcel of his approach. I mean, he is part of what I call Black Conservative Inc., whose messaging is I want to be careful, but I kind of don't want to be careful. I'm not going to be careful. Their messaging is designed to demean the Black community in order to make white conservatives feel like racism doesn't have an impact. That's what they do. So they're the ones that always say that when it comes to the problems that the Black community faces, it's Black people that are the problem. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't things that Black people need to be doing better. Nobody would, even Black Democrats will say that. But to intimate that that's the only issue and that there are no external forces, or that somehow history doesn't matter all of a sudden, or that the way things progressed in this country didn't also contribute immensely to that, it's absurd. Even policies today contribute to issues that the Black community faces. I just interviewed somebody from the Heritage Foundation about how there are still gun control laws that have a racist impact. But you'll have to listen to the podcast when I put it out. But needless to say, his approach gives the left a lot of ammo, whether you agree with it or not. Obviously, I don't. I think that is far more nuanced than saying, oh, it's just Black culture is just jacked up. And by the way, I think there's more to it than just saying, oh, it's just racism. No, the problem is that both sides lie to you about it by leaving out the stuff that doesn't support their narrative, right? So on the right, they leave out the racism part, or they diminish it or pretend like it doesn't matter. It's because that's their whole platform, because the left says racism is everywhere and everybody's racist, right? So the left will leave out the parts about welfare, about the breakdown of the Black family, and the right will leave out the historical impact of racist policies that have been implemented, and some even today, to make things harder for Black people to get ahead. Really, if you want to actually get to the bottom of it, you'll take both sides and put them together, because there's a lot of factors that figure into this stuff. I'm getting off of topic. I'm preaching now, but still, that's my issue with Larry Elder. I'm saying this because people always ask me about it, because I talk about other people, but I haven't talked about Larry Elder all that much. But the thing is, none of his approach, none of his ideas are going to appeal to Californians. And these are just a few of the remarks that Democrats exploited to portray Elder as the ultimate villain. And they were able to frame this whole race as Newsom versus Elder. And the right actually inadvertently played into that. They hyped up Elder versus Newsom. But really what the messaging should have been is just on Newsom and his faults. They should have been like, regardless of who's the front runner here on our side, this is a referendum on Gavin Newsom's governance. And that's where the message should have stayed. But again, Larry Elder gave the left the weapon that they needed to distract from how horrible Newsom was. There was also other issues like, Elder, he's been a radio talk show host. He doesn't have the political experience relevant to the office he was seeking. It's not like he was running for like a city council position or something like that. And I do get that the outsider appeal is very strong. I mean, we saw that with President Trump, but there's a difference between Trump and Elder. President Trump had years and decades as a businessman running an international organization. Those skills are transferable to the office he was seeking. Now, the reality is that there were far better Republican candidates who could have led the recall effort to victory. These would be people who have already been doing the work on the ground in the state's government for years. I mean, there are a lot of people talking about Kevin Kiley. He was a good candidate. But here's the thing. They would have been better candidates because of the fact that they actually care about the work that they've been doing in California for years, but also the fact that they didn't have this baggage. I think, and again, I mean, even if there were a better candidate that ran, the effort still may have failed, but it would have had a much better chance, because remember, these voters weren't excited about Newsom. They weren't. Like, when they measured enthusiasm, it was in the tank. It only went up when Larry Elder started getting traction. If there would have been a Republican who maybe they disagree with him on some policies, but they don't have to worry about him, tanking the economy or not knowing what he's doing and not being, overly offensive, they probably wouldn't have turned out, even if they would have been okay with Newsom. But that didn't happen. So to a lot of people, it did seem like Elder was mainly running for clout. And there have even been rumblings in the recall movement that indicate that. Like, there was a reason why he ran. And I'm not going to go too deep into that because I can't read minds. But from what I'm saying, there's more to this. Because I also have to acknowledge it was not the California Republican Party that invited Elder to run. They didn't endorse him. They didn't urge him to run. There was nothing like that. Elder inserted himself into this election. So he didn't have necessarily the rubber stamp. So to me, I mean, I can see why some might believe that this was done more for clout, or because they think that he just wants to seek higher office and he's using this to as a stepping stone. And I mean, I can see why people would believe that. But kind of if we take a step back and not focus on Elder per se, what I'm seeing here with this election, especially when it comes to how we on the right perceive things, how we think about things, we make a huge mistake when we associate name recognition with electability. Now, Elder's fame on the right, what it did is it sucked attention away from others who might have actually led to a yes vote, because everybody on the right knows who he is. They may have listened to his radio show. They've seen him on Fox News. They've seen him on other conservative media, which, by the way, I didn't see a lot of conservative media talking to Kevin Falconer or Kevin Kiley. They were all talking to Larry Elder because he is the most famous. And I think too many of us on the conservative right have become enamored with the glitz and the glamour and the sparklies and the things that look good, and we get distracted by that from substance. So we don't focus on substance. We're just focusing on whether this guy owns the libs, or if he has zinger lines that he says on his podcast, or what have you. If they say the right things, or they push the right buttons, or have the right level of notoriety, we don't tend to consider whether or not they'll actually be able to win over their constituents, right? This isn't just happening in California. I'm afraid this is also happening in Georgia with Herschel Walker. I'm not going to get into him too much. I'll talk about him later, but that's what's happening. Herschel Walker is the front runner for the Senate race. If he gets the nomination, he will lose. It'll go the same way this election did. And I'm not knocking Herschel Walker. I think his voice might be better outside of office, but he has baggage too. He's got some legitimate domestic violence issues. I mean, there are other issues with him as well. And people are going to push him, especially since President Trump endorsed him, which I wish he hadn't have done that. I think he needs to be more discerning when he gives his endorsements. I know they're friends, but that doesn't mean that Herschel Walker has what it takes to win that election, especially if he's running against Raphael Warnock. He's not going to win. You got to put somebody up there who can win. I think that if Republican voters had rallied behind a less than, not just Republican voters, because like I said, conservative media was really hyping him up too and ignoring the other candidates. I think if they had rallied behind a less incendiary candidate who also had a history of working within the state's political system, then the Democrats would not have been able to use them to galvanize their base the way they did. It would not have been effective. And like I said, they would have pretended that he was a racist or whatever. But the thing is, that doesn't always work as well as we think it does. If you have the right person, it doesn't work because you have to be able to prove it. So, I mean, if they haven't made statements that are questionable, then you're not going to be able to make much stick. And Larry Elder made it a lot easier. Now, I'm not saying that they should have pushed like some kind of milquetoast or Romney-like candidate. I think a conservative candidate could win in California, but it has to be approached the right way. And if we want to start making inroads in blue areas, and that does include Black communities, we need to be fighting smart. And that kind of leads me to the last thing I want to talk about. I mean, there is this, I'm seeing something very disturbing, and I'm not liking it. I'm seeing a lot of influencers coming out and saying that Republicans and conservatives should give up on California. Now, I think the Republican Party overall did that a while ago, but there are still grassroots people who want to make a difference. And telling them that they should just leave the state or whatever is not a good idea. Now, here's the thing. I get some people might need to leave California for other reasons. I did. And if that's the case, then fine, leave California. If it's better financially and if you can make a better life for your family, I totally get it. But for others who may not be in that situation, leaving just for political reasons is not going to help. But really, I'm talking not just to regular folks. I'm also talking to people who are politically active. Don't give up. I don't care what Ben Shapiro says. And yeah, he was one of them. I don't care what Robbie Starbuck says. I don't care what John Cardillo says. Don't give up. Giving up, the things that Ben Shapiro, Cardillo, and Robbie Starbuck are telling you to do is exactly what the Democrats want you to do. Now, I'm sure these people mean well, and I get the frustration because remember, I was born and raised in Southern California, and I've been a conservative for, 15, 16, 17 years. I get the frustration. But I will tell you who doesn't think like that. I mean, because this whole surrender mentality that's going on right now, you know who doesn't have that? The Democrats. Democrats are trying to make inroads in Texas. They've been making some progress, gradual. They're not going to give up. They're not going to give up. They're not going to give up in Georgia either. We saw what happened with the 2020 election. And I don't care what you say about voter fraud. The Senate race was a Senate race. They voted for the Democrats for the Senate. That didn't happen overnight. That was almost 10 years of work by Stacey Abrams and other Democratic operatives. They played the long game. They didn't give up. Do you see any major Democrat influencer out there saying, hey, if you're a leftist and you live in a red state, you should leave? Do you see them saying that? You saw it a little bit with that whole Texas abortion law, but other than that, But this is not the first time I've seen conservative influencers telling their followers to give up on California and New York. No, the reason why conservatives haven't won in those states is because they haven't. There are a lot of reasons, but a lot of it is because the GOP doesn't fight smart. And sometimes they don't fight at all. Sometimes they just go along with it, especially in places like Chicago. You know, they're sounding, I said this on Twitter, I said, these people are sounding just like Barry Goldwater sounded when he persuaded the Republican Party to stop courting Black voters. It's the same principle, just different people, different scenario. So we got to stop this whole defeatist mentality. We've got to start focusing on substance over the sparkle. And I get it. Some people give you that tingle up your leg, like Sonny Johnson says. But sometimes you might find candidates who have both. They have the glitz and glamour, and they've got the substance. I would love that. They are out there. But we're the ones who have control. We're the ones that vote them in or vote them out. That's how we need to change our way of thinking. So I'm going to go to the chat in just a second. In just a second, let me just scroll up here. And while I'm doing that, just want to remind you, don't forget to head on over to libertynation.com. Again, a proud sponsor of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles. You'll get the daily briefing or the member zone. You got a lot of stuff that you can do at Liberty Nation, but the articles are top notch, the best. And I'm not just saying that because I write for them. I'm saying that partly because I write for them and I'm awesome. No. Great articles, honestly. I mean, if you like my approach and you like how I try to deliver an honest opinion without all the outrage porn and all the stupidity, Liberty Nation, I'm not the only one. You'll get a lot of nuance. You'll get thoughtful commentary that even if you don't agree with it, it'll make you think. So if you want to think, then head on over to libertynation.com. Let's see what we got going on here. All right. This is interesting. Larry Elder was the first conservative I ever listened to, and he moved me away from the left. Fast forward, I see him nothing as more than a Republican hack. Here's the thing. I mean, when it comes to like policy and stuff like that, I agree with him on a lot of stuff. I don't agree with him on everything, but I don't know. It's tough. It's tough. There are a lot of people who I liked back when I was a younger conservative who I don't like as much anymore. Or I still like him, but I'm just kind of like, I give him a side eye, like Dennis Prager. Dennis Prager was instrumental in me becoming more conservative. But some of the stuff he's been saying lately, I'm like, come on, bro, come on. But with Prager, I don't think, I mean, he doesn't mean any harm. I think he just has his ideas, and maybe he'd be open to something else if somebody got to talk to him. Let's see. To his credit, he got Dave Rubin to question narratives a smidge more. Yeah, he did. I actually watched that. I watched both of their episodes together. He did a good job with that. Unfortunately, I think that, you know, now Dave Rubin has more of the conservative ink of the black view of the black community. I could be wrong, but it just seems like he does. Brownmall, yes, you can't say there is no systemic racism when you argue that Democratic policies are racist. Ding, 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 ding. When I say yes, there's systemic racism, yeah, there is. And guess who's doing it? The Republicans aren't innocent, but who's doing it now? Democrats. I mean, you talk about police brutality, where does that tend to happen? It doesn't happen in rural areas. It happens in Democrat-run cities. Yep, the framing is what lost the recall, because Elder should have never been a thought when voting yes or no. And you know what? Actually, I had a conversation with this on a radio show. She's actually a progressive. She's far to the left, and she was pointing out the way they do the recalls is kind of silly anyway, because it means that the majority doesn't get the governor that they want. So you vote yes or no, and then you vote for somebody else. But if they get most, like 30% of the vote, and that's more than everybody else, then they get to become governor. It would make more sense to have the recall. And then if the people say, yes, we want to get this guy out of there, then you do a runoff election or something like that, where people can get more of what they want. But yeah. Let's see. Did you ever read Elder's campaign website, specifically his vision page? I did go to his website early on. Now, and here was another thing that kind of tipped me off when he first got into the race. Like, there was a period of time where he had no website. I'm like, you're running for governor and you have no website. Where's your policies? What are you talking about? And I think I did a little bit later than when he finally put one up, and I just saw a bunch of donations. Now, I didn't look at it after that, so maybe they added more stuff to it. But no, I didn't see his vision page. Let's see. What's up, Keisha? How you doing? Do you think that any Republican who would have gained traction eventually would have gotten met with the same Dem slander, disparaged news? Of course, every Republican is going to get that. But like I said, some Republicans give them the ammo, some don't. Their narrative does not always stick, if you think about it. I mean, Trump won in 2016. And I think without coronavirus, he would have won in 2020 as well. Their racism accusations don't always stick as much as we think they do, because they try them all the time, but they still lose elections, right? So I think that that's their go-to strategy. Just label your opponent as a bigot, and that's it. But it doesn't always work. And I think that there were other candidates where that wouldn't have worked for them. Wendy, whatever happened to Antonio Sabato Jr.? Did he tank his political aspirations by insisting Obama was Muslim? I forgot about that. Probably, yeah. And if that's the case, if I remember correctly, yeah, he deserved to have his political aspirations tanked. What's up, Rod? Good to see you. Left controls California? Yes, it does. Regardless, it's hilarious. The passport mandate's coming out right after the election. Yeah, that's what was at stake. He's going to get his revenge now. He's like, oh, y'all want to try to recall me? Yeah, I got something for you. Passports are a pivot away from attention on Afghan accountability. Yes. Yes, and I've got some other stuff to say about that too, but I got to save that for another live stream. This is interesting. Newsom is weak and GOP has a shot at the governorship in California in 2022, not the Senate. But state politics are not national. It's doable. GOP has done it in the North, I'm assuming in the Northeast very well. That might be true because even though they voted to keep him, that doesn't mean that they like him. So the Republicans need to start fighting smarter. They need to really start putting forth the effort because over time, even if they don't win in 2022, if they actually play their cards right, over time, then they can start winning. The problem is that the Republican Party has this mentality that they only want to invest in races that they know that they can win. The Democrats don't do that. The Democrats invest in races that they know they're going to lose because each race gets them closer to where they want them to be, especially if the GOP is sleeping on them. So we need to start thinking more long-term than short-term. The only reason I would say leave is if you thought national divorce was around the corner. I've heard people talking about that. I don't know if it's going to happen, or if it does, it's probably not going to be anytime soon. But I could understand that, definitely. What else we got? Okay, yeah, 2 questions. What's next for conservatives as a whole? Conservative morale is very low. Yeah, especially I would imagine in California, because I mean, they took a hit. But one thing that this recall did show is that they had a chance of winning. Newsom was afraid. The Democrats were afraid. And I will tell you, I was speaking with Democrats in California, and they were terrified that Newsom would lose his job. I think Republicans in general have more power than they think they do. And especially because not every Democrat is far to the left. They can win over those Democrats. There are Democrats that conservatives could win over if they just actually started investing the time, energy, and resources. Let's see. Yeah, Elder's campaign vision was a stream of consciousness and was impossible to follow. It was a mess. No surprise he couldn't stay on message. That was another thing that I noticed. When he was doing interviews, he wasn't really laying out a lot of specific policies. He was just talking in generalities. It seemed like he didn't really even know what he could do as governor, especially with the comments he made about emergency powers and stuff like that. It didn't seem like he had a really focused message. Let's see. I'm going to do 2 more and then I'm going to head off. I got some writing to do. How do we get everyone to just hold politicians accountable regardless of party? I would take a different Dem if at least Newsom, Cuomo, etc. were held accountable. The only way this happens is when we get out of this team sports mentality. That's what I talked about at the Solutionary Summit. I'll be posting another clip of that, by the way. But I talked about it. I said nothing's going to change if we're still stuck in this team sports mentality where we automatically defend what somebody does if they agree with us politically. It's not going to work, and both sides do it. I don't care. There are times where some people will hold their side accountable depending on the situation, like if they have to. But in general, it's team sports. If a Republican does it, it's okay. If a Democrat does it, it's wrong. We got to get out of that because that just allows our people to misbehave. And not everybody who's on our side is actually on our side, right? So last one. I'm in California. My morale is higher than ever. Newsom was underwater in early August. I know a lot of Dems who hate him, but they were scared of Elder. And that is this whole video in a nutshell. That's why the recall election lost. They feared Elder more than they hated Newsom. That's the way it is. And it's a hard pill to swallow, especially if you like Larry Elder. If you like Larry Elder, that's fine. I don't care. We can agree to disagree. That's fine. But even if you like him, you have to acknowledge he gave the Democrats what they needed to generate enough fear that they turned out to keep Newsom in office, which is why we have to be smarter with how we do these things, right? So those are my two cents there. Thank you for showing up. And until next time, keep your minds free.